Hi everyone, Nathan here from jazzguitarlessons.net. I'm back with another Q&A webinar session for you. It's the third Wednesday of the month, as usual. So January,
17 hours.
There's Karen letting me know it's 5 o'clock. It's 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, January the 15th, 2020. And we're doing a Q&A webinar stream on the Blues Special edition of the Tune of the Month Club. It aired back in, I feel like it was 2017 maybe. And this is actually a really interesting segment of the Tune of the Month Club, now referred to as one of the pro standards rather than standard essentials. We have two levels for those of you, two levels of standards issues that are that we offer to our members. For those of you who don't know, let me know with a question if you have any questions to the email address nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. I'll be happy to answer any questions you got. You might be hearing some opera singing. There's some vocal lessons going on in the other room right now. So I hope that doesn't bother you guys too much. It's a little bit of nice background music for me. Let's get some housekeeping out of the way before we dive into the standard. Actually, the standards. We'll talk more about that in a second. Like I said, we stream every third Wednesday of the month. If at any point during this stream you have any questions, write them down. Send me an email at nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. Or better yet, send your questions through the live chat function. You need to be watching on the youtube.com website in order to actually see the live chat and be able to interact with it. And I think you also need to be logged into a Google account, so a YouTube account or a Gmail account, one or the other. But yeah, if you have any questions throughout the stream, let me know in the live chat box. You'll find it in the bottom left or bottom right or directly to the right of the video window on youtube.com. You'll be able to send me a question. I will check the stream periodically to make sure I'm not missing any questions, and I'll be able to address them at that point. So I think that's basically everything, and we should probably start talking about the stream right now. Actually, I am going to check one thing. Sounds like we have audio, so we're all good here. I'm just going to mute that just in case things go wrong, and so you don't hear me echoing twice. So this edition of the Tune of the Month Club, the Blues Special edition, it's called Blues Special Essentials. If you're looking on learn.jazzguitarlessons.net, or if you're on our old store.jazzguitarlessons.net website, then you'll just find it under Blues Special. This one has 3 songs that we're going to be, using to showcase this idea of the blues form and what you can do with it and how you can approach it from the idea of comping, chord melody, and single note solos. So how do we approach those areas of guitar from the blues, or using the blues song form? And so actually we decided to, for this issue, because it's a special issue, we decided to use 3 different songs, 3 different blues songs to showcase these ideas. One is Butch and Butch by Oliver Nelson off the album Blues and the Abstract Truth. The next one is Sandu. It's a very classic E-flat blues by, I think, Clifford Brown. And the third one is a Wes Montgomery blues called D Natural Blues. He didn't bother giving it a title. He just called it what it was, the actual form of the song. So first off, as always, we're going to start with a lead sheet analysis analyzing the chord progression and maybe a few of the melody elements of some of these songs. But for the most part, it's going to be the harmonic analysis of the chord progression of each of these songs. And if you download the lead sheet for the Blues Special, you'll get a 2-page lead sheet, because it's 3 songs, 3 12-bar forms that we're looking at, including an intro for Butch and Butch, which is shown on the Blues and the Abstract Truth record. It's really cool stuff. So let's start with Butch and Butch. I'm going to do my weird lead sheet setup, a harmonic analysis setup, hopefully my microphone's still good. Okay, good stuff. Which involves pointing the light down here, and then also making sure that the camera points down at the page. So hopefully, 1 second, I'm just going to make sure that I can see what we're looking at. All right, there. So there we go. We have ourselves the blues special lead sheet. Sorry if the shadow's getting in the way of anything. But we're going to take a look at Butch and Butch first. Hopefully you guys can see that. I'm just going to shift things around so there's nothing in the way. And I'm going to start off from here. So from here, you should be able to see the lead sheet for the blues special. We're starting off with Butch and Butch. That's the first one. It starts off with an 8-bar introduction. It's got a pickup to it. And right off the bat, we'll mention the key signature. It is the key of, it's only 1 sharp, so it's the key of G major. Hopefully you can read this. And the whole idea of the whole harmonic progression idea of the introduction involves using, it's really just a progression that leads up to this D chord, the 5 chord. So I'm actually looking at this from the back, so that you, from the end and then forward. So we're going to definitely get to this 5 chord here. And, or you know what, I'm going to write it down here just to make it a little bit simpler. The 5 chord, and we're going to do the same thing here in the second line, essentially the same thing in the second line. And yeah, it's still a 5 chord. And the reason why we're heading towards this 5 chord is because it sets up. Sorry, if I rustled the microphone. The reason we're heading to this 5 chord is because it sets up the beginning of the blues form starting on G. So this definitely goes to our 1 chord. I'm going to write it here again. It definitely goes to our 1 chord. So let's analyze how we do this progression. It's actually a decently common progression, and it starts with a sharp 4 as a minor 7 flat 5 chord, leading to C minor 7, the 4 chord but minor. It's sort of a variation on a very common setup, or a very common introduction line. I said I was going to do this, and then I completely forgot myself. So there's our sharp 4 heading to our natural 4, heading to, it says G over B, and it's basically trying to push us towards, sorry, actually, I'm going to just write down the chord symbols and then show you afterwards. So this is really just a 1 chord over the 3. Just so you know. And then we're heading to the 6 chord. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do that. The 6 chord, which sets up the 5. Perfect. And then we just continue on like that. But I'm going to tell you what's really happening here. What we have here is a sort of just a descending chromatic progression from C sharp, the sharp 4, down to the 4, C minor, down to the 3, B natural. We're doing a first inversion of G major, just a G major starting on its chord 3rd. And that's reflected in the melody. There's a G natural in the melody. I'm sorry I wrote over it, but you could be able to see it here, the G natural in the melody. And this will become relevant in a moment why this actually matters. And then to 6, which sets up the 5. And it's all sort of a little bit roundabout, unfortunately. So we're going to have to go back to some first principles real quick. I'm going to try and finish off this intro fast. But essentially, this is what we're doing. The second line is actually a better representation of what we're doing. We're going from sharp 4 to the 7 to the 1 over 3 to the, well, in this case, flat 6. So it's slightly different from before, which sets up, once again, the 5 in a slightly different way that the natural 6 sets up the 5. This natural 6 could really really go to the A minor 7, which is our 2 chord. The A minor 7 is our 2 chord. And that's important because then it's just like saying, hey, well, what we need to get a chord that'll get us to 2, which is usually the chord that gets us to 5. But instead, we're just gonna skip the middleman. We're just gonna go from the 6 chord directly to the 5 chord as a sus chord, and that just means that the melody has a G note in it, and we're gonna sort of not play the F sharp of the D7, the third of D7. We're going to replace the third of D7, which is an F sharp, with the G natural, the fourth of D7. So all of this to say that we're really just taking this. So sorry, the first thing that's confusing is probably this one here. It's saying E7 alt and then resolve a whole step down to D7. So a dominant 7th chord on E and then a dominant 7th chord on D. Why would we do that? It's like, well, okay, the idea is that it's really just a secondary dominant that heads to the 2, then which usually heads to the 5. So we're just skipping the middleman there, kind of combining it all into one 2-bar moment. Or almost, 2-bar moment, sorry. So that's what's going on there. Another thing that's confusing is, well, why G over B? Or actually, you know what? Let me take this a step back and look back over here. Or skip ahead and look at what's going on. You have this sharp 4 heading to 7. Then we have this 1 over 3, and then a 6, or a flat 6. We got to take all this information together. But the typical formula that we do is sharp 4, 7 as like its own 2/5. So C sharp minor 7, flat 5, followed by F sharp 13, flat 9. Well, it's an F7 chord. It's an F sharp 7 chord. F sharp dominant 7th. So it's a 2/5 cell, which I'll write like this. And then we have essentially another 2/5 cell. It would actually be easier to see here. 2/5. It's another 2/5 cell. But how do we? But it's another 2/5 cell that doesn't look like 2/5 here. Actually, I'll start with this. The usual, as I was saying before, the usual formula is sharp 4, 7 as a 2/5 cell, and then 3, 6. This is flat 6, I'm well aware, but 3, 6. You see it up here before in the way we did it before. 3, 6. I know that's not the 3 chord, but it's a 1 chord with a base of 3. So it actually kind of, and same over here. So it kind of actually functions in a similar way. The bass root motion is what's important here. So we have a 3, 6 progression. So sharp 4, 7, or sharp 4, natural 4. If we do like this sort of tritone substitution, descending chromatic root motion idea, very, very powerful motion in jazz. So C sharp minor going down to C minor. Or we could just do the normal 2/5 cell, C sharp minor to F sharp dominant 7, effectively. Then we have another 2/5 cell, as I mentioned before. Sorry if you can't see that real quick. But we have another 2/5 cell, and they all sort of just lead from one to the next. This one goes here, and this one goes eventually to here, D7. And that's what's going on. It's just 2/5 cells leading to our final 5 chord. And that's where we want to be, sustaining for the next 2 bars, which sort of builds the tension and then leads to G. So that's all I wanted to say with with this sort of, I know it's a mess now, but this sort of introduction, that's what I wanted to mention, is that it's just one big buildup leading to 5, which has to inevitably resolve to the 1 chord, and that's where we start the blues form. So all of that for one big introduction. But let's actually talk about the Butch and Butch song form. This is a bit of a modification on a bird blues. I'm gonna just check this real quick, make sure we're not missing any questions or anything. Jerry's joining us today, so you can see this. You can see the lead sheet clearly. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate that. And Jerry is exactly right. If you're reading the chat right now, G over B is more like a B minor 7 chord, more like the 3 chord. And that's why I wrote 1 over 3, so you could so that you can know for sure that that's exactly what we're talking about. I just realized that you can't see that again. 1 second. There we go. Sorry. When they expect you to go high tech, go low tech. So yeah, the G over B chord, as I mentioned before, that one there is basically a stand-in for the 3 chord. They function very similarly, the 1 and the 3 chord. So it can stand in for one for one another. Substitutions like this in jazz are common, where one thing is synonymous with another, or at least functionally synonymous. Let me just check here real quick to see what we got going on. I want to mention for the Butch and Butch melody that it's a little bit like a okay. So the form itself. The form itself is very similar to a bird blues, which is a very complex sort of jazz blues with a lot of chromatic motion in the chords, and a nice big what's called back cycling. And you can find out more about bird blueses in the article called "Introduction to Bird Blues" on jazzguitarlessons.net, our blog. But I do want to mention that it's a fast blues. It's highly chromatic in this case. It's a modified form of the bird blues in G. And here, let's talk about that. Let's just go through it real quick. Like I said, you can find out more about it, but let's talk about the specifics here. I'll compare it to how a bird blues usually sounds. So let's see here. You start with 1, as in all blueses. You start with the 1 chord, but with bird blueses, you basically just start on a major chord. It's not supposed to be dominant in that case. And normally we back cycle towards the 4 chord. We're trying to. I'm going to outline the major landmarks that we usually go for, and the usual landmarks are the 1 chord, and I'll circle them. The 1 chord, the 4 chord, and then eventually the 5 chord in the final bar. Or for a lot of jazz blueses, it's usually like a 2-5, because it's just what we do in jazz is do 2 5s instead of just a normal 5 chord. So that's what I wanted to mention with this in general, is that we have this these 3 major landmarks: the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And the whole idea is with these bird blues modifications, or any sort of jazz modifications to the standard blues form, which is essentially this, and I guess also usually we're supposed to have a 1 chord here, but whatever. The point is, these are our major landmarks. The whole point of jazz modifications to the harmonic progression of a simple blues is to more strongly guide the ear with more motion towards each of these major landmarks. We go from 1, we try to make it all the way through to 4 and point to 4 in the last bar here. We try to make it all the way to 5, point to 5 in the last bar here. So how do we do that? In a normal bird blues, you'd usually hear from 1 for the first bar, and then you'd have a 2-5 cycle starting on the 7th chord, kind of like what we saw before. We normally find 7, and my bad. You normally hear sharp 4, and then 7, but as a dominant chord. That's what you'd normally hear. So it's called back. That's the first thing. It's a 2-5 cell heading towards, and then the next one would normally be a 3-6. And then that 2-5, it's another 2-5 cell that normally heads to the actual 2. 3-6. Oh, I am totally wrong about this. Sorry, guys. I should have trusted myself at first. Let's start that again. The thing that you would normally hear is 7, 3 as a dominant chord. So this would normally be so G major followed by F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and then B7. So you go it would go 7, 3. I totally did this wrong. Sorry, everybody. 7, 3, and then it would go to a minor 6. So in this case, E minor 7 if you want, to 6 to 2 as a dominant chord. Sorry, so it would go to the 2 chord as a dominant chord. So again, these are just 2/5 cells, but starting on F sharp minor 7, going to B7, and then going to from E minor 7 to A7, which leads again to A7 leads really nicely to D minor 7. So this would be the actual 5 chord. Sorry, let's make it. I'll just write it here. So the actual 5 chord, it's supposed to be a V. So D minor 7, and then the actual the 1 chord, but as a dominant 7th chord. So the idea is 2/5 cell leading to another 2/5 cell leading to another 2/5 cell, all pointing towards 4. And this is exactly what we actually get to here. This is the only part that's actually the same as another bird blues in the first phrase. So we actually do get to the 5 and 1 chords. And again, it's a 2/5 cell. Sorry if if my writing of this was confusing. I didn't mean to make those mistakes there, and they obviously made things really messy. So again, the whole point is setting up this D minor 7, G7. So in a normal bird blues, we'd have G major, and then F sharp minor 7 flat 5, followed by B7, followed by E minor 7, followed by A7 halfway through the bar, and A7 then leads to D minor 7, and we have this nice 2/5 setup that leads to 4. And that's exactly what that setup was for. So it's a bunch of chromatic harmony. Sorry, not chromatic harmony, but it's a bunch of chords that can be really confusing to look at first. But again, just keep in mind that the whole idea is to take you through this nice long back cycle that eventually leads to this 2/5 and ends up at 4. And then at the 4 chord, we're going to do the same sort of thing. So that's the typical bird blues for the first 4 bars. But in Butch and Butch, instead of a back cycle, we do like this is going to sound stupid, but a 4 cycle, a forward cycle. It's not really what it is, but it eventually leads us to our 2, 5 to 4. Eventually, anyway. So a D minor 7, G7. It's a nice secondary dominant cell that leads us to 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to take G and we're going to go chromatically upward. We take the bass root motion upward chromatically. So G, A flat diminished 7 as a passing chord, heading to A minor 7, the 2 chord, and then another diminished 7th passing chord, A sharp diminished 7 is what we should call it, but whatever, because it's leading upwards to G, and really it should be G/B if we're following the root motion. And then we can just have that nice 2/5 at the end of it, and it brings us directly to our C major 7, our 4 chord. After that, I'm very sorry if you can't see this, but this is C sharp minor 7 and F sharp 7. Normally, a bird blues would actually just play normally a bird blues would actually just stay on the same root for the second bar of the middle line, and instead just turn it into a minor chord. So it would normally go C major 7, and then C minor 7, F7. But instead, they actually start at a half step higher. And then they have this chain of chromatically descending 2/5s. I'm just going to write them as 2/5. It's not the actual 2/5, but they are just 2/5 cells. It's 3 cells, 3 separate instances of a 2/5 chromatically descending. So we actually start on C sharp minor 7, F sharp 7, and then C natural minor 7, and then F natural 7, and then another half step down, B minor 7 to E7. And as I mentioned before, this E7, why would this E7 go to D7? Well, again, it's just sort of this idea of skipping the middleman of E7 would normally go to 2, but instead of going to 2, we're just going straight to 5. So there we go. We just B minor 7, E7, straight to 5. Normally this should be, I'm going to put in brackets here, you could just say A minor 7 and then D7. That's normally what you could do, and it would work just the same. But that's the basic idea of what's happening in this particular blues. It's a very weird set of chord changes. It's a very complicated set of chord changes. But hopefully you understand a little bit more about it. You can email me if you have more questions. And like I mentioned, the bird blues that we usually play starts this chromatic descent of 2/5 cells by a half step lower than this. It usually starts on the same root as the fourth. It starts on the 4 chord. We do it differently here because it still works. It still gets us to where we want to go. So funnily enough, the lesson here is that there are multiple paths you can take to get to the same landmark. And there's usually a justification that will allow you to get there, such as this E7 resolves to the 2 chord. But instead of going to the 2 chord, we're just going to skip the middleman and just stay on a D7 alt. It's kind of nice. Let's talk about the other blueses now. They're a little bit more straightforward. There are jazz blueses. So hopefully you can see this. Sandu is a blues in E flat major, 3 flats, and we're gonna just analyze it real quick from the point of view. I'm just gonna blitz through this. There's our 1 chord, E flat 7, and oftentimes, just to create some motion in regular jazz blueses, we play the 4 chord and come back to 1. 1, 4, 1 is something you hear a lot in all sorts of musics: pop, country, folk music, like blues, jazz, a whole lot, especially in the blueses. And then we just stay on the 1. Sometimes you'll see a 2/5. Sometimes you'll see an F minor 7. And shoot, what am I saying? Sorry. Sometimes you'll see a B flat. Oh, I can't write fine enough with this pen tip. This marker tip. B flat minor 7, E flat 7, which leads nicely to our A flat 7 chord. That's optional. We don't have to do it every single time, but most jazz blueses will include this 2/5 to the key to the 4 chord. This secondary 2/5 to 4, and then it's 4. Oftentimes you'll see a diminished chord, an A diminished chord. But we don't have to have it here. Again, it's optional. And it leads back to the 1 chord very nicely. And then we have our 6 chord as a dominant chord instead of as a minor chord. And that leads very nicely to our F7 chord. C7 resolves to F7 very nicely. And that, in this case, is our 2, which we usually have as minor. But in this case, we're going to make it dominant 7. So I put it as a capital Roman numeral. And then we get the 5 chord, and then that resolves to our 1. And we have this nice 2 chord, and then the song sort of ends on an E7 alt. The idea is that we're actually just ending on the 5, but really it's the flat 2 chord. It's the tritone substitute of our 5 chord. 5 and flat 2, B flats, I'm going to write this in brackets, B flat 7 and E7 alt are functionally the same chord. They're functionally synonymous. They can be substituted for one another, and they're a tritone apart. And so we called that the tritone substitute. And that's something you'll hear a lot, especially in endings or in dramatic moments, things like that. So that's Sandu, 1, 4, 1 for the first 4 bars. Cool. Sometimes you'll have a 2/5 that leads into the next 4 bars. 4 brings us back to 1 2 bars later, and then a bar after that, the 6 chord, which leads us nicely into the end game of the form. 2, 5, 1, and some kind of 2-bar turnaround. In this case, it's 1, 2, flat 2. And that really leads us nicely into the next song. Let's take a look at this. Now, unfortunately, I'm very, very sorry to mention this, but whenever the lead sheet of this was created back in 2017, we actually there's some major mistakes actually written in the chords. This is D natural blues, which means we'll actually find all the same major chord landmarks as we did in the previous one. D7, there's our one chord. And I'll talk about the corrections that need to be made in a second. But just for all of you who've printed this sheet music, you should probably take a look at this if you haven't been confused and then figured it out, confused by it and then figured it out subsequently. But 1-4-1, and then whatever, doesn't matter. You can have a 2-5 that leads to the 4 chord. There's our 4 chord G7. G is the fourth of D, and normally we'd have this sort of G and then A flat or G sharp diminished. You know, whatever. It's a lot of people like A flat diminished better, but really, it's the idea is G sharp diminished 7, and then it should lead nicely back to our 1 chord. But that's not our 1 chord. That's our 4 chord, and you'll notice that the rest of the chords, if you analyze them according to a typical jazz blues, actually all accord with this. So I think with this key, where G is 1, as if this was a G blues, kind of like in Butch and Butch. So I think what happened was there was a copy and paste error where the person who made the lead sheet for this copied and pasted the progression. So we have a 1, you have the 6, you have the 2, and then you have the 5, and then you have a turnaround 1 3 4 sharp 4. Sorry, what am I saying? 1 3 4 sharp 4 heading to 5. I'll actually write that in. 1 over the 3, and then 4, and then sharp 4, and then 5, and then actually 5. So, well, this is actually 5 sus, and then actually 5. And that's the turnaround that they use here. It's kind of neat. You can do that yourself, but they should have been in the key of D. So we're actually going to change all these notes. This should be a D7. This should be, sorry, my wrist is hurting. This should be a B minor, a B7 flat 9. B7 flat 9. This should be our E minor 7. E minor 7. This should be our A7, and then we should have D7, and then in the next beat over F sharp, and then we should have G, and then G sharp diminished 7, followed by D over A, and then just A7. So there you have it. That is the analysis of our blueses. I'm just going to take away the light here. I'm going to put everything back in place. Oh, I'm sorry if that was loud. Hey, everybody. See my face again. I need a better solution for that. I have to explain again that that we have that particular setup for our harmonic analyses because YouTube live stream doesn't use Google Hangouts anymore. And so we don't have the screen share function, unfortunately. Sorry to say. So I have to point the camera down. Hopefully that works out for you guys. I'm just going to check the questions real quick. Make sure there are no questions. Bars 14, 15, 16 is backcycling, right? Jerry, bars 14, 15, 16. Yes. 14, 15, 16, Jerry is referring to the middle 4 bars of Butch and Butch. So that would be C sharp minor, so the C major 7 followed by C sharp minor 7, then F sharp 7, C minor 7, F7, B minor 7, E7. Yes, it's another form of backcycling. The idea, but it's a chromatic descent rather than the typical like the way that 2/5 cells usually go. And I'll play an example of this because it's a good idea. Alfred, good to hear from you. Thanks for joining us for the stream. So yeah, brain hurts. Good stuff. There's a lot going on in here. But I want to keep. If there's one thing that you should learn from this harmonic analysis, look at all this marker. If there's one thing you should learn from all of this, it's just this. This is the blues. That's it. 1, 4, 5. And to answer Jerry's question, yes, the C sharp minor 7 to F7, followed by a half step down, the same cell to a half step down, C minor 7, F7, to B minor 7, E7. That's all kind of back cycling, but it's a chromatic descent of it's a chromatic descending back cycle. Whereas the back cycle that most bird blueses have in the beginning, where they're starting on the 1, G major 7, and then they start on the 7 chord, and they play a back cycling series of 2/5 cells, not chromatically. They do it in a way where each 2/5 cell leads naturally into the next one, and you end up on the 4 chord, C major. So we went from a G major. There's our 1 chord. I'm going to play it up here just so you can see the motion on the guitar. But there's the 1 chord, followed by 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 as a dominant chord, which leads to 4. 1 as a dominant chord, as a secondary dominant chord, leads to 4. Very nicely done that way. And again, most bird blueses would stay on the C minor on the next bar, or stay on the C but turn it minor on the next bar, and play C minor 7, F7. I'll play it over here actually. I'll play it here. C minor 7, F7. And remember what we talked about before, the flat 2 chord, the tritone substitute? The same idea is happening here to lead us chromatically. Again, it's back cycling again. It's the same idea where we're trying to get to another chord further down the line through a series of 2/5s. But in this case, we're going to do it by descending chromatically rather than doing the normal 2/5 leading to the next 2/5 in a sort of diatonic normal way. We're doing it chromatically now, just half steps at a time. We're using tritone substitutes to do that because you see C minor 7, F9 is the tritone substitute for the B7 chord. And B7, I'm going to just talk about the 5 chords because those are the major landmarks, the dominant chords that we're using them to propel ourselves forward. So C minor 7, just think about it as an accessory to this murderer. So, sorry, they're an accessory to the F7. They lead towards each other nicely. So we're going to think about F7. I'm playing it as an F9 for those of you who might be confused. It's an F9 chord voicing, but it's still an F dominant 7th function. So F dominant 7 normally leads to B7. Yeah, great. But if we think about it as the tritone substitute of a B7, well, B7 leads to E. It's the 5 of E. So F7 can also be repurposed to lead to E. And we're going to make it a dominant chord. And that we can do exactly this, but can apply the exact same logic. So like I said, F7 half step down, or resolves a half step down because we're treating it as a tritone substitute. So we end up at E. F7 resolves to E. Well, same logic, E7 resolves to E flat 7. And that's how the chromatic backcycling in a bird blues usually works. Now we can just add in the 2 chords that are accessories to each of those dominant chords, and we get this. C minor 7, F7, which leads to, well, B minor 7, E7 as a unit, which leads to, well, B flat minor 7, E flat 7 as a unit. And the whole point is trying to get us to that chord there, 5. And really, that E flat 7 you could just go straight down to D7 and just hang out there, just like they do in Butch and Butch. But usually you have you add the 2, like we did before, as an accessory to the D. 2 and 5 can be sort of used as a unit in terms of like where you're resolving to. So anything that gets you to the 2, that'll get you to the 2/5. Anything that gets you to the 5, that'll get you to the 2/5 as a unit. You can use that. You can use them as a sort of joint as a team almost for justifying getting to them, getting to either one of them. So your chord progressions, one way or another, can get you there. And you can do things like skipping the middleman. You can just say, like, let's just ignore the 2. We're actually trying to head to the 5. So you do that. Or you play something like the E7 in Butch and Butch, the E7 at the end of here, where that doesn't lead to 5. It leads to 2. Well, again, they act as a team. So if you lead to 2, then you're gonna lead to, or if you lead to the 2 chord, then you're eventually going to get to the 5 chord, because that's what the 2 is for. It's a predominant chord. So it's got to get us to the dominant. Let's see here. Alfred's saying, what's the best way to practice 2/5 cells? The best way is, that's a really tricky one. I wouldn't say there's one best way, and it depends on the kind of chord vocabulary that you're using. But basically choose the chord vocabulary that you're using. So if you're taking the Comping 101 course, then you're probably using chord shells. So like C minor 7, like this 3-note chord, root, flat 7, flat 3 together, root, minor 7, minor 3rd, and then followed by F7, root, 3rd, flat 7, right? So Alfred, what you want to do is you want to take that piece of chord vocabulary, probably from Comping 101, and what you want to do is you'll want to play different 2/5 cells in various ways. There's actually a lot of ways you can look at it. There's a lot of inspiration you can get from jazz standards themselves. That's one way. That's one thing to think about. So just open up a book, open up the real book maybe, and then just play through some, try to find a song rife with 2/5 cells, especially 2/5 cells that take it kind of out of its key. Maybe a bird blues. Actually, this is probably the best idea, is just grab a bird blues, like Au Privave. I'm going to write it down in the Charlie Parker. Au Privave. I don't know if that's how they pronounce it, but it sounds like a French word, so I'll pronounce it like it's French. A French title. Or this isn't a bird blues, but it takes that sort of backcycling thing in exactly the same way. Confirmation, that's a great one. And another one, a lot of these bebop tunes there's a lot of melody notes going on, like Donna Lee and things like that, Confirmation, Scrapple from the Apple. There's a lot of melody notes going on, and there's a lot of chord changes. A lot of complex chord motion to get you to a very, very standard location, just a really big landmark. You want to go from 1 to 4 to 5. Those are huge landmarks in jazz. You want to get to the 6th chord because you want to shift to a relative minor sound. That's another big landmark. Another bird blues that you might want to work on is Charlie Parker, Blues for Alice. And you just open up to those pages and you just practice through them. And then what you'll want to do, Alfred, is make sure that you practice that song in a different key, transpose everything to a different key, and try to understand it from the perspective of the chord functions, 1, 4, 5, and everything in between. Do that because that'll help you understand the relationships between the chords, rather than just sort of see a mess of chords or be lost when you try to transpose to a different key and be like, well, I play G7 and C is 4 steps, is the 4th of that chord, so I guess that's my 4 chord. And then you do it in C and you're like, okay, well, C is my 1 chord, and you have to do it a bunch to really get used to it, but you definitely want to practice it with all of the chord functions in mind, so you understand the relationships between these chords. Definitely work in different keys. That's my short answer. Another answer is actually to go through the cycle of fourths progression exercises in Comping 102. So Comping 102 has a bunch of cycle of fourths exercises where you just play, like let's say the B7 dominant chord, which leads to E7 dominant chord, which leads to A7 dominant chord, which leads to D7, which leads to G7, to C, to F7, to B flat 7, to E flat 7, to A flat 7, to D flat 7, to G flat 7, to B major 7, or something like that. So all of this is to show you the typical motion of these chords. The dominant chords resolve in fourths motion. Yeah, Jerry just mentioned this is like a Joe Pass trick where he just back cycles continuously by saying, hey, well, a 5 chord, a dominant chord, resolves by a fourth upward to the next chord, or a fifth downward if you want to call it that. But we're just going to stick with one direction upward, sort of standardize it that way, and we're going to call it the cycle of fourths. And it's pretty typical. You get by moving through the cycle of fourths, you'll hit every note, every chord root that you possibly could, from C to F to B flat to E flat to A flat to D flat to G flat to C flat, or let's call it B natural because that's silly, B to E to A to D to G and back to C finally. So it's a cycle. And that's the most useful thing. So comping 102, make sure to work on the exercises in comping 102 after you finish the ones in comping 101. Cool? So that's, if you have any questions, again, keep them coming. Keep them coming in the live chat. I love it. But what I want to talk about next is the chord melodies. I want to talk about the chord melodies. I'm going to try and breeze through them. I won't actually give any demonstrations, but I do want to talk about them because they're really good. Give me a second here. Okay, so I have some notes here on my computer. On my other screen. So talking about the chord melody, we're going to talk about, these are 3 different chord melodies, but they're only 12 bars long. So they're very easy to learn. Some of them are. The Butch and Butch one is tricky. They have their own intricacies and trickiness, tricky sections that you need to watch out for. But I really want you to understand that these are actually really accessible pro standards. So as far as the pro standards go, these ones are really accessible, and all you need to do is slap a repeat sign at the end of each of them, and you got yourself the beginning of a chord melody. The beginning of the in head of the entire song form, and then you can do some solos and do whatever you want in comp. Most of these ones are meant to be played with a backing track. Some of them can be played alone. The Butch and Butch chord melody can't really be played alone. I would say you would want to play that with a backing track / with actual backing musicians, a rhythm section. So let's talk about Butch and Butch. The Blues in the Abstract Truth record centers largely around a large horn ensemble. There's 4 horns in this. It's a trumpet player, an alto sax player, tenor sax player, and also a bari sax player, which you don't hear often in jazz, but it is pivotal to the voicings used in Oliver Nelson's arrangements. Oliver Nelson, I believe, is the tenor sax player in this. I think Clifford Brown plays the trumpet on that record. I think Clifford Brown's the trumpet player on that record. And I can't remember who the other 2 are. Sorry, guys. The rhythm section's great too, but the intro section for our chord melody for this mimics the voicings used by the horns. So that's why I mentioned that. So listen to the Blues in the Abstract Truth recording of Butch and Butch, and you'll hear the intro. Also check out, just as an aside, definitely check out Stolen Moments from the same record. Stolen Moments is this beautiful blues, 16-bar modified blues form, very modal sounding, and all the horn arrangements are like chordal voicings, so using voicings that are stacked fourths rather than stacked thirds, and they just sound great. It's so fantastic a tune. Listen to that one. That's the aside. So this one, like I mentioned before, this one's kind of modeled after a bird blues, or a modified bird blues. So it'll be really similar. The melody itself is also very similar to a Charlie Parker bebop standard. There are a lot of notes to be played in the melody. It's a lot of eighth notes, and it's meant to be played fast. So take your time. The idea behind this chord melody is you have that horn intro, and then the melody itself is really just play the bebop melody with some chord shots in between wherever there are opportune moments. It kind of needs the backing track, like I mentioned. It's not really supported by yourself entirely, so you have to have some amount of support, but it could still work. I said that in my notes, I mentioned that you could definitely put in a repeat sign before the final chord to bring you back to the beginning of the blues form. Or I think you might have to change the final chord so that it's not so final. and then you can just you have 24 bars for the intro head. And that's great. It's usually a good idea to repeat. It's usually traditional to repeat the in head and the out head of a blues form because it's so short, especially when you play at a really fast clip. I'd say focus on learning specific phrases at a time. And I think I might have just mixed that up with Opry by accident, or Blues for Alice or something. Yeah, I'd say just work on making sure you have specific phrases learned at a time. Don't try to play the whole thing at once while you're learning it. It's just a lot of notes to memorize. But the chord shots that end up getting played are small voicings usually, so they're not so hand intensive, especially since you're doing this crazy fast eighth note melody. Not crazy fast, but a moderately fast eighth note melody as it is. It's hard enough as it is. So small voicings, very, very good. 2 notes or 3 notes at most, usually. The next one, Sandu. This one's a little bit more on the blues sounding side of things instead of the bebop sounding side of things. It's less hectic than the previous, than the Butch and Butch. There's a lot more chords involved here. There's going to be a lot of moving around with the chords. It's a little bit easier to support yourself solely or solo with this instead of using a backing track or a band or playing with a band. But this is a very commonly called tune, Sandu in the key of E flat. It's a very commonly called tune at jams. So learn this arrangement. If there's any one that I'd recommend you learn, it's the Sandu chord melody in this one, because you can definitely use it in jams. Same with the D natural blues. It can get called D. Well, guitar players will call it a lot because it's a Wes Montgomery tune. Similar to the last chord melody with Butch and Butch. It's usually a good idea to change the last chord to like a 5-chord voicing rather than the flat 2 chord voicing that they end on, and then repeat the form, and both in the in head and out head. And then once you get to the final chord, to the actual ending of the song, once you've gone through solos and stuff like that, then you can end on the flat 2 chord, the E7 chord, and that'll feel a little bit more final, like a big dramatic ending, and then you're good. You can choose to resolve to the 1 chord afterwards, or forget resolving, and that sounds cool too. Depends on what you want to do. I also want to mention that for this one, you should really pay attention to Nicolas' fingering on the video for the demonstrations of this song, of this chord melody, because some of those decorated melody notes, boo ba dee dee, ba ba da da, ba ba da ba bee, boo boo ba ba. Some of those decorated and fast-moving melody notes get followed by a chord shot, and so they can be tricky to transition between. Nicolas has very efficient fingerings for it, so whenever you're learning through this and you're like, oh man, that's a hard one to get to, check out what Nicolas is doing on the video, and he'll show you, like, it's actually very efficient fingering. You still got to move fast, but at least you can do so efficiently with little strain, and that's really important, keeping the tension out of your hands physically. Just talking and I'm running out of water. This is good. Let's move on to D natural blues, the final chord melody in this piece, or in this suite of chord melodies for blueses, jazz blueses. This one is probably the trickiest one to play. It's all chords, but you can basically support yourself entirely with this one without a backing track. Some of the chords aren't exactly like root position, so you're not getting like a strong sense of bass motion in a lot of it. It's mostly like an almost walking chord. You take the melody and the whole thing is harmonized with chords under every single note, basically. But it's a very Wes Montgomery way to play it. So let's take a listen to Wes Montgomery's version of D natural blues. He's the writer of the song, so you should really check it out. But the chord melody follows the way that he would play it. You're going to be jumping around a lot between chords, so it's important to maintain similar or common fingerings between chords, so that not just fingerings, but hand shapes between chords, because then you don't have to move like crazy into these different, you don't have to twist yourself into circles and into pretzels just trying to get from chord to chord. So again, check out Nicolas' fingerings Sometimes they're obvious. Sometimes you have to do it a certain way, but other times it's really helpful to just take a look at what he's doing. Also notice that Nicola is using the right hand thumb technique that that Wes Montgomery does. He plants his hand down and he just uses his thumb to strum each chord. It gives a nice tonal middle ground between strumming with a pick and finger picking everything simultaneously. Just wanted to point that out. Maybe consider trying that out. Again, practice this a phrase at a time. Stay tension free in your arms and your whole body, really. Stay limber throughout it. These fast chord jumps can really work out your left hand chops. I'd say just make sure to move through it slowly at first, and don't try to rush the chord changes. And once you get a handle on playing it slowly, you can gradually increase the tempo. That's all. We don't have much time left, but let's just run through a couple things. The comping study for this, I think, is actually really important, because it's important to know some general comping techniques for targeting the blues in general, because it's the most common contrafact. A contrafact is a new song written on another song's chord changes, a new melody written on another song's chord changes. So every blues is a contrafact of every other blues. They all have the same chord changes, or at least similar chord changes. So it's the most common contrafact in jazz. Well, in music, I'm pretty sure. The blues. Don't quote me on that. Actually, I could be wrong about that. There might be some non-Western styles of music that have way more prolific contrafacts, or maybe it's just a Western idea anyway. So let's talk about some of the ideas here. We're going to go through 3 choruses in what key? I forget what key we're doing it in. 3 choruses of blues. I'm pretty sure it's in the B flat blues. So none of the songs we've learned so far were in B flat. They were in G major, E flat major, and D major. But another common key is B flat blues. So the comping study that we have here is in that style, is in that key. The first chorus of comping is going to be in one style, the second chorus is going to be in another style, and the third chorus in a third style. So the first style that we listen to is sort of a country jazz, Chet Atkins style of finger picking through the chords. Listen to this. So very bluesy, but a little bit country kind of sounding. You got that bass, 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 usually on beats 1 and 3. You also have these nice melodic things happening between. There's a nice blues line in measure 10. That last chord is an F7 sharp 9. The 5 chord played as a Jimi chord, Jimi Hendrix chord. The sharp 9 chord, if you're unfamiliar with it, it looks like this. F, A, E flat, and then also A flat, or maybe you want to think about it as a G sharp. It's probably an A flat. A and A flat, or A and G sharp in the same chord. F7 sharp 9. There's our sharp 9 note. That's our Jimi Hendrix chord. I'm in the wrong key. Purple Haze chord. So that's the F sharp 7, or F7 sharp 9. F7 sharp 9. I think actually Jimi Hendrix plays it in E flat in Purple Haze. Either that or E. I'm not sure. E, but with the guitar tuned a half step down. I'm not sure. But anyway, that's the Jimi Hendrix chord. A very, very good chord to end on, a very iconic chord to end on in a form in order to turn around to the top of the form of the blues. So play that on the end of 2. Bam, boo-doo, bam, bam, da, 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 that sort of thing. That would be, let me just see here. Which document shows the Atkins style blues? Sorry, Alfred, I don't think I was perfectly clear, but we're talking about the comping study. So this is the comping study in our blues special course. So download the lead sheet. Download the comping study worksheet. You'll find the study is there, and everything's in B flat. You can also check the sound slice of the comping study. The comping study with sound slice video. Let's check that out again. So that's the idea behind all this. I don't want to spend too much time on the Chet Atkins style because it's not particularly, it's very style specific. It's worthwhile if you want to get the specific sound, but if you're not going to play it with it very often, maybe you can skip this one. You can afford to skip this one. But definitely learn that 4-bar ending. It's the typical ending with a turnaround. Measures 8 to 12. Learn that because it's not specific to the style. It's just you can totally use it. It sounds measure 8 through 12 sounds like this. Sorry, here's measure 8. Or actually, sorry, I meant measure 9 through 12. My apologies. It sounds like this. Here's measure 9, 2, then the 5 chord. You gotta learn that. Down, down, down. Da, da. So yeah, definitely learn that ending. Learning a bunch of turnarounds, it's a great idea. Actually, I would recommend for those of you listening, if you get a chance, learn a bunch of blues turnarounds. There is actually a great video by, his name is escaping me now. Rick Beato. There's a famous YouTuber on music and other stuff. He does a video where he shows, I think something like 12 different Joe Pass blues turnarounds. They're all fantastic. He's picked them from specific songs, and learn them because if you can play any of those at the end of a song, it just immediately spices up the form. It sounds great, and if you can just pull it off, it's an immediate crowd pleaser. So just go and learn those. And because they're blues turnarounds, they're ubiquitous across so many different songs. If you're playing a blues, you can do it. You just have to make sure you play it. You can play it in all keys, or at least all common keys. That's a little bit easier to work with. Moving on, the next chorus from measures 13 to 24, it's actually in a boogie woogie style blues, and the boogie woogie style is really characterized by it's like the piano left hand style that goes, like a little bit like. It's a sort of blues that we'd all kind of play, right? And if you're wondering what I'm doing right now, I'm actually just playing a power chord on the 1 chord, so B flat, and then replacing the 5th, root 5th, with the 6th voicing. I'm reaching 2 frets higher. And I'm also palm muting with my right hand. That's important. And then I reach 1 more to get that flat 7 note. You can play it down there too if you want. So this comping study actually sort of emulates that and takes it 1 step further, wherein we're going to be playing a bunch of chord voicings that follow that sound, that sort of eighth note sort of walking sound. But we're going to be playing a bunch of chords that create motion and extend that idea. But we're also going to be incorporating the half step above approach that you learn in comping 102. That would be right here. Let me just play it. It's the idea of playing a tension chord that is a half step above the chord that you want to get to. And it creates a lot of tension towards that chord. And you usually do that on beats 2 or 4 because the target chord is going to land on beat 1 or beat 3 if it's a chord that's supposed to be played halfway through the bar. So if you want to get to a chord, play a chord a half step above that one and follow it. So let's say I want to get to the 1 chord on beat 1 of the next bar. So the beat before it, and I want to get to B flat 7. There's my target. If I play this chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, it just sounds like it wants to fall to that chord. So that's the half step above approach. It actually for the most part, especially in this comping study, that you'll find examples of the half step above approach that make use of that tritone substitute, where instead of playing F7, the 5 chord, falling to B flat 7, you can explain it the half step above approach by saying, hey, B natural 7 is the tritone substitute of F7, and that also falls to B flat 7. So there you go. All of that is to say that we have some, we have a few ideas in terms of taking this boogie woogie style and using and sort of elaborating upon it. I need to see. Let's see here. 1 second. Burt blues, blues special. There we are. Okay, so here's how it actually sounds. Let's hear it. I'm just going to stop there. Every phrase is going to be the same. The first phrase, the second phrase, and the third phrase, they're all going to be the same in this sense. A little bit more chromaticism in there, but same ideas. So check comping 102 to get these ideas down. I would say that this section is simpler than it sounds, with easy fingerings for guitar. They're all very easy fingerings. Don't be scared by the number of notes that are being played. Just try them out slowly and get it phrase by phrase. First 4 bars, second 4 bars, last 4 bars. So definitely check out comping 102 to learn the basic ideas behind this, and then put it all together in this comping study. I think that's probably for the best. So 1 second. Alfred, you're asking, no, I just wanted to know where it was, where the Atkins style blues is. You'll find it under. So if you go to the blues special course and you scroll down to PDF sheet music, you'll find it under the comping study. It'll say blues special comping study. I wish I could share my screen so that I could show you exactly where to find it, but unfortunately I can't. But yes, blues special course, scroll down to PDF sheet music, download the sheet music from the comping study lecture specifically in that section. Let me know if I haven't understood your question. Oh, you found it. Okay, good. Oh, I did. Okay. I'm just behind on comments. Sorry. Okay. If there was a specific section in this to learn, I would suggest it be the middle section, the boogie woogie style. The final section is, there's also some typical like blues shots in between the main boogie phrases. You've probably heard that sort of bop, bop, bop. They usually have, the top note is usually the tonic really high up, the tonic being the name of the key, the B flat in this case. So you have a really high B flat and some chords underneath it, a chord harmonizing underneath it. It's usually really high up on the guitar when you play it like this. This is definitely a right hand piano thing, like a Count Basie sort of thing, right? Let's see here. The third section, didn't learn the second section. The third section is probably one of the more elusive comping styles for guitar, I'd say. It's a walking chords section. So you're actually going to be creating a lot of motion between chords, sometimes using chromatic chords. But again, the whole idea is making sure that your target chord is on beat 1 or beat 3 if you have another chord that you need to play there, and put tension chords that are weird, chords that lead to those notes that create tension towards those target chords. Like if you want to hit B flat 7, play a half step above it just before it. Well, play those on beats 2 and 4. The walking chord style is all quarter notes, and here's how it sounds. It sounds like this. to keep in mind what your major landmarks are. This ending, you should definitely learn that ending. So it's another must-learn ending. It measures 35 to 36 in the sound slice. You can even play it in eighth notes once you've got the fingerings. Actually, I think the Days of Wine and Roses Essentials has a similar blues ending like this. So this is another must-learn ending, a nice turnaround. It's the last two bars of the form, the turnaround, and it sounds like this. Let me see if I can play this. I haven't actually attempted this, but so it starts on a B flat. Oh, can you see this? It starts on a B flat 13, and then we make sure we get up to the. You want to hear how actually listen to the bass note. It rises from the root to the third, fourth, sharp 4, 5. Do, da da da. That's the 5. We're trying to get to the 5. Remember, we're trying to go to. So B flat 7, heading to. Heading to I meant to contrast this. The bass is doing this. So it's a nice long walk up from 1 to 5, and then does he play it like he plays it like this? Just a nice B flat, B9, half step above the target chord, resolving down to the B flat 9, the 1 chord. Awesome. So the bass is going up, but the melody is it's going down from the tonic to 5. They both eventually meet at 5. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of tune. So you get this, and then you get this. Sorry. You have the 7. Yeah, that's right. Which leads nicely to the B flat over F, B9, B flat 9. So it sounds like this. I'm going to play it in quarter notes first. Oh, sorry. Sorry. That's what I'm going to play. And you can play this also in eighth notes to get, especially if you're playing at slower tempos. And that's sort of the same thing we do in Days of Wine and Roses Essentials. It sounds like this. It's in the key of F. I think. That sort of thing. That's the basic idea behind that blues ending. I think it's a pretty iconic blues ending. Just an ending. It's not even a turnaround. So definitely learn that. Like I said, check out those Joe Pass videos by the Joe Pass endings or turnarounds that Rick Beato together. Really nice. He plays them himself. That's pretty much it for the single note solo. I only have a little bit more I want to talk about. Single note solo. The comping study. That's pretty much it for the comping studies. The single note solos. I don't want to spend too much time on. We do have to go. But I will say this: first chorus is the first two choruses are solo choruses of Sandu, and the last chorus is one chorus of D natural blues. I'll start with the D natural blues one. It starts off in a very Wes kind of double time line. There's specifically measured 35 to 36, a very, very Wes Montgomery sounding thing. Very Wes Montgomery sounding solo line that you'll definitely want to learn. I'd say add it to your vocabulary as soon as possible. And it sounds like this. It's on the 6th chord of the form, so the 8th bar of the blues form. It sounds great. It's crazy. It's kind of fast. You're playing 16th note lines. It's double time. I'll start it from the measure before. And some blues blues line to end. That's all I wanted to say about that, about the Wes Montgomery one. Check it out. The first two choruses are Sandu, and I do want to mention this. You start with a solo break on the turnaround, and it leads into the first measure of the form. It sounds pretty cool. It sounds like this. 2, 3, 4, 1. And then this first phrase in the first four measures it sort of shows the crux of the blues. And this is what I want to drive home. Here's how it sounds. And that's it. That's the very first phrase in the Sandu solo, and this is what I want to end with. That phrase starts on the third of our E flat 7, right? We're in the key of E flat 7, our E flat blues, and we start our first phrase with this note. The major third of E flat 7. And the crux of the blues is playing with the sense of major and minor and mixing them together in this really, really interesting sounding set of notes. And so here's the crux of the blues. Versus that's the crux of the blues, is being either major or minor and mixing those two sounds, and then taking it one step further, doing it at specific opportune moments. When you play in the blues like Sandu, you start with the E flat 7 chord for 1 bar, and then you go to the A flat 7 chord for 1 bar. And E flat 7 has a G natural, but A flat 7 has a G flat. So the overarching key that you're in goes from a major sounding key to a minor sounding key. We're on the 4 chord, but it sounds like we should be playing. It sounds like we should be playing it in the key of E flat minor, rather than an E flat major sounding key. I know these are all dominant chords, but for the purposes of this, we can think of major and minor keys as having a major third or a minor third. And that's the crux of the blues. So this first phrase sounds like this. Major, minor. Sorry, let me start it again. So it starts off major, do-ba-da-ba-ba, then going into minor, do-do-do. And that's just emblematic of the blues. So learn that and play around with this idea of like, okay, well, that E flat 7, whenever we see an E flat 7 chord, we can play G naturals. We can play the major third. And we get this A flat 7 chord. Then we're back to the E flat 7 chord. And then we're back to the A flat 7. So yeah, play around with that, see what you can do. There's a couple other neat phrases in there. There is I think the last phrase of the first chorus is this E flat minor pentatonic line. You could use it anywhere you want in the blues. It's great, even on the major sections. Again, it's about freely expressing yourself with both sides of that coin. The major side, that's really like nice and bright and happy, and that minor side, that's really like bluesy and like it really digs deep into this sort of kind of this dirt, this grit to it, you know. And so that last phrase is this one here, I think. And then second chorus. So that's a great line to learn. Just learn that line and play it anywhere you want. There's a bunch of different places you can take just steal the vocabulary from and just incorporate it into yourselves. And that's a great idea. Jerry, you probably already left, but thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time. Lanny, thanks for joining us. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. That's pretty much it for the blues special. That's all I really wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, please let me know at nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. I'm happy to answer your questions there. Or ask me on the members forum, the JGL members forum group on Facebook. If you're not already a member and you're watching this, then definitely request membership and join the community. It's really good. Steve, you were here this whole time. You didn't say hi. What the heck? I feel insulted. But thanks for everybody for joining me. I hope thank you, Alfred, for asking those questions. Really appreciate it. Jerry for clarifying a few things, or asking me to clarify a few things in some cases. I hope that you just showed up, Steve. I see. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you all learned something. Feel free to watch the video on demand, the VOD. Once I finish this stream, if you missed any of it, you can just hit refresh and you'll be able to watch the stream pretty much from the beginning right away and track to anywhere throughout the course of the stream. It'll be basically just published on YouTube at that point. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Nathan@jazzguitarlessons.net. We'll have another, as always, we have our webinars on the third Wednesday of each month. So the next webinar that we're going to have is on February the 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it'll be on the Just Friends Pro Standard. Just Friends, great classic standard, usually in the key of C major. No, G major. G major. The first chord is C major. It starts on the 4, but it's really in the key of G major. Anyway, we'll talk about that next month on Wednesday, February the 19th. Until then, we'll see you on the forum, or I'll talk to you via email. And happy shedding, everyone. Take care.